Hello and welcome to this chess strategy video about how to squeeze your opponent. So if you don't know what that means, basically you push your pawns forward and gain more space on the board than your opponent. And this can give you an advantage because you'll have more room for your pieces to maneuver while your opponent's pieces will be more cramped. So the game that I'm going to go over was played at the local chess club. I had the black pieces and my opponent Daniel had the white pieces. So he began with d4 and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to play, so I played knight to f6 just to see how he would respond, and he followed up with knight to f3. So then I kind of get ready to set up either a King's Indian defense or a Grunfeld type defense. So my opponent, I think he was trying to set up, this London system setup. So I play this to keep pieces out of e5. And then, you can also play d4, which, if you want to squeeze your opponent, you probably want to have at least equal space or more than them. But we'll see how the game turned out here. So right now we're just developing. The computer says that it would have been better here with this knight at b to d2 move. That kind of puts the game in my favor here. So Daniel was ahead. Let me make sure here. So he's ahead now. It looks like knight to c3 is what the computer wants. But he develops the knight here to back up his other knight. So now I just play bishop to g7, and the computer wants me to play knight to h5, immediately going after this bishop. But in the London system, if I attack that bishop, he could play e3, and then if I capture the bishop and he recaptures with a pawn, well, then he'll have a pawn on f4 and d4, and that can kind of cramp my position a little bit. He'll have a good control over this e5 square, although he may not be able to utilize it at the moment because of this D pawn covering it. Anyway, the game continues with this move, e3, setting up this London system defense or attack, I guess, for white. So here I'm just kind of playing moves to see what my opponent will do. I played a6, just kind of, which wasn't the best move because now white jumps back in the lead here. Castling would have been better. But I was thinking, if he castled queenside, he could start throwing all these pawns at my kingside. So continuing on, he just fortifies the center. I push forward, getting ready to fianchetto, and he attacks me with the queen checking here. But it looks like h3 would have been better because now black has a slight edge after this move. Which I just develop and block the check. So now my knight is kind of backing up the other knight, and my opponent castles queenside, and the computer says that is a mistake that jumps the game up in black's favor by 1.23 here. So it looks like h3 is what the computer likes, which would keep the game about even. And then white, would probably go ahead and just fianchetto the bishop here, which was the plan anyway. Although the computer also recommends castling. But I was kind of hesitant to castle in case these pawns started rolling forward and tried to break up my kingside. So anyway, my opponent castles queenside. So I just continue with my plan of developing this bishop. And now my opponent played bishop to d3, which is good, but the computer likes e4 even better. Grabbing more space. And, if I'm going to stay cramped here and let my opponent grab space, why not? Although with e4, I guess I could have tried to capture there. Let me take a look at this. If we go back. All right, if he just played e4, so the computer says that e4 is best. It looks like I could just pick that off. So, that's probably why he didn't play that. So, anyway, before I get into a sideline here, let's just continue with what actually happened in the game. The bishop is developed, so now finally we'll be able to see how you can squeeze your opponent. Now, the computer wanted c5 here, saying that was a little bit better, but I played b5, chasing the queen away here. Now, I guess my opponent could have moved forward, so then if I tried to play c5, he could capture my queen. But he retreats back, creating a battery that aims at my king side here. You're probably thinking that if I push this h-pawn up to h6, he could maybe sacrifice his bishop. If I capture, his queen captures with check, and maybe cause problems on my king side. But in the game, let's see what happened here. He retreats back, and I play c5. So now I'm trying to gain space and begin this strategy of squeezing my opponent. So the computer says I should have immediately just put my rook over here, lining up on the queen and the king. But in the game I played c5, and my opponent jumps forward with knight to e4, and the computer says that is a mistake. That it would have been better to play, let's see, h4 immediately, which is usually a good strategy when somebody fianchettos. You can push this h-pawn and threaten to push forward here. Maybe not immediately. Sometimes you would push this pawn, and if the knight captures, you could capture with the rook and break apart these pawns, or you could push this g-pawn at some point. And anyway, you get the picture. Pushing the pawn on the edge of the board towards a fianchettoed position can be a good strategy of breaking open that position. So in the game, if they played that, once again, the computer just recommends lining up on the king and the queen here. But in the game, knight to e4 was played. I captured that knight, which was a missed opportunity. It looks like I should have either castled immediately, and then we may have something like capture, knight captures, or instead of castling, I could have played maybe c4 here, beginning to squeeze my opponent, pushing his bishop back, gaining space. But if that was played c4 first, he would want to capture with a check. I would recapture, then the bishop would have to retreat back to here to guard this g2 pawn. That way the knight could move and my bishop wouldn't be able to capture here. So, here I could press forward, attacking the queen would move, and now my queen would jump forward, threatening this pawn. So you get the picture. But in the game, after knight to e4 was played, I thought, well, I'll just knock that knight out of there first, but it looks like I should have attacked the bishop first, because now we have a capture, and I thought, well, after this bishop captures, now I'll be able to gain more space, drive the bishop away with this move. But, I don't know, for some reason, instead of that, the computer actually wanted queen to c8, which, could let this bishop capture. We could just trade off bishops, I guess. But the computer gives king to b1, pressing on the queen side with the pawns. Finally, the bishop captures, queen captures. And then we have the theme once again of this pawn pushing forward here towards the fianchettoed position here. So b4. So here you're getting an example of how to press your pawns forward, gain space, and squeeze your opponent, which we'll see more in the game what actually happened. All right, so if we go back to the game, the bishop captured here. The pawn attacks, driving the bishop back. So this bishop retreats, and now we push the other pawn. c4, gaining more ground, squeezing the opponent. He retreats back, covering this knight, and now knight to f6 was played in the game. Let's see. And the computer says that's best. So here, my reasoning behind this move was, one, to keep this pawn from being able to push forward later in the game, but also from here I could maybe jump up here to e5, threaten a fork over here. But also this keeps, if I could move up to e4, it keeps the king from being able to escape over here. And get out of the way of this attack that will be coming once these pawns start moving. All right, so in the game we had a4. So here, I guess my opponent wanted to, I don't know, he wanted me maybe to capture here, and then he could swing down and recapture with a check, and I guess that's what he was trying to do, maybe open lines over here. But this move, according to the computer, is a mistake. That knight to e5 would have been better. So this move would jump the knight down into my position. And then the computer recommends only one move that keeps the game in black's favor, and that's knight to e4. So here you would be threatening this fork of the rooks. And at this point, the recommendation is just to swing this rook over to stop the attack on this f2 pawn. All right, but in the game, we had this a4 move, and so we see here after that move, it's a mistake that swings the balance in black's favor by about 1.5 pawns worth of material. So, continuing on, it looks like maybe bishop to c8. That's what the computer says is best. But instead, I jump forward. Now, trying to keep this knight, or excuse me, the king from being able to escape over here. And then also threatening this fork. But now, interestingly enough, the computer's actually saying that b4 would have been a better move. So I guess we could take a look at that. b4. And trying to break things open around the king. Now, looks like knight to d2 retreating. I think that is the best move, although here it's saying we should just capture. So let's take a look at that. Delete that move, and then just capture this unprotected pawn. So what should we do here? Now, queen to b6. And the computer can find these types of continuations, but a lot of times people wouldn't actually play this kind of continuation very often. I don't know, maybe a chess master that can see deeper than the average person might be able to figure out what is best here. So now knight to d2 is recommended, and then, well, once again the computer wants us to bring this rook over. It did the last move. Now it's saying just go ahead and take this pawn. And then if we capture this pawn, knight up to b1. I don't know, if we go back here, what if the queen just moved here to cover this and protect this pawn? Well, I guess it can't. It would have to go here because of our pawn. So, I don't know. What about this move? Oh, nope, that wouldn't work because the knight could jump in there and attack. All right, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, anyway, let's look at what happened in the game. We had a4. The knight jumps forward here. So now, to avoid this fork, my opponent played bishop to g3, and it says, the computer says this is a mistake. Why? Well, let's take a look at this. So better would have been to play knight to g5. So now if I capture, forking the two rooks, it looks like rook at f to d1, and then I should not capture that rook. It looks like it's better to play knight to d3, attacking the king. And it looks like that's the only move that keeps the game in the lead. I mean, I guess we could take a look at that. It's the only move that keeps black ahead. So check, bishop captures, pawn captures, attacking the queen, queen captures, and now looks like castling is what the computer wants. And this keeps black ahead. But, if we look at the capture over here of this rook, well, now there's a tricky continuation. Capture here, forking the rook and the queen. Queen should move away. Capture, capture. And then we just exchange off and things get really crazy here. We start attacking over on the king or queen side over here. He's attacking on the other side. Check. And then, something like this. And then this pawn, can't be protected. So that is one way the game could have continued. But if we go back and look to see what actually happened, my opponent retreats back, and I move my queen over here, attacking this pawn. If the pawn captures, I would be able to check over here, I guess, but he could block with his queen. So let's see here how this continued. Now the computer's saying I should have repositioned my bishop. But in the game, we had knight to d2. So my opponent's trying to get rid of this knight. And it looks like bishop to e5. Now the computer wants that. I played f5, which is a miss. Computer wants us to get rid of the bishop pair here. Then capture towards the center, opening the h-file for the rook potentially, and then capture here, something like this. But in the game, I played f5, thinking if my knight is captured, well, then I can just really fortify in the center and squeeze my opponent even more. And here, my opponent played this move, which it looks like it was better to just go ahead and capture the knight with his knight. With this. So capture, capture. Oh, and then this was interesting. Normally you want to capture towards the center, but it looks like in this position it's better to capture with the center pawn instead. And then if they play h4 to try and attack, then you just play h5 and keep things kind of closed up. So the game could have commenced in this way, but once again we would have squeezed the position and cramped our opponent. Now, something that's important when you're squeezing your opponent and you're grabbing space, we notice here how the more pieces that are exchanged off, that benefits the person who has less space. So if you have more space, you want to kind of avoid trading too many pieces. If you're in a cramped position like white, he wants to trade off pieces because the pieces that remain will have a little bit more breathing room. So let's see how this continued here. So f3 attacking. I go ahead and capture, but it said I had a better move, capturing the bishop once again. So capture, then we have white attacking on the king side. I'm attacking on the queen side. But in the game, f3, I capture, and here it looks like a king capture would have been better, allowing the king to escape away from this cramped queen side here. So let's see. This is what the computer wanted. Capture with the king. The bishop jumps up here, putting more pressure on, kind of trying to get this bishop in a better position. And then now this move is recommended, just attacking the queen. And then here, I'd probably capture en passant, try and open up the position a little bit around the king. So if the king's stuck in the middle, you want to kind of open the position so you can try and get an attack on that king. All right, so in the game, the rook captured. And now, computer says this is a miss. It would have been better to capture with the king, and that would keep the game closer to even. But now, I'm able to capture this pawn. The computer likes castling kingside better. And now bishop to d1 is played, which, my opponent moves the bishop back to try and capture this pawn. But I'm able to move my bishop here and protect it. So instead, the computer wanted king to d1, a3 pushing forward, capture, capture, something like this. And now, what do they recommend? Queen to b2, just to challenge this queen, and we would trade off some material here. Okay, but in the game, we had this move, trying to target this a pawn. And so this gives you a good example of how you can gain space, squeeze your opponent, and then use that extra space to your advantage. So now my opponent's really cramped. I have more room, so I bring my bishop up here to protect this pawn, which is coming under fire by this bishop and queen battery. So now my opponent plays bishop to f4. The computer does not like that, saying it's a mistake, that queen to b1 would have been better, which would allow the queen to swing over here and kind of stop any surprises down this A file. So maybe the game would continue with this, and now b4. At this point, what is recommended? My queen is under attack. Maybe I would capture en passant, but the computer does not like that. It says that just retreating queen to b6 would be better. All right, well, if I went queen to b6, then rook to a2, we'd end up losing this pawn. So let's see what happened in the game after this bishop to f4 move. So I thought I could generate some kind of threats here against the king. So I decide first to play e6 to fortify this pawn, and maybe allow my bishop to swing over here, especially if I push this pawn, and my bishop could swing up here if the pawn captured me. Then the bishop could recapture with a check. So my opponent Well, actually, the computer didn't like this move. It said once again that I should castle. But, I was worried about pawns being thrown forward here and the rook swinging over and generating an attack. But I guess I was a little faster over here, and he would have to worry about an attack on his king before he could get to mine. So e6 was played, but this move did give my opponent time to jump his bishop down here, the best move, and take control of this diagonal. So now I played bishop to f8, and the computer doesn't like that. It says it would have been better to move in this direction, targeting this pawn. I didn't want to do that though, because the bishop could go here to b4 and attack my queen, and then that kind of slows down my attack. So I thought, well, let me take a look here. After bishop to d6, I challenge his bishop, and this was an inaccuracy, but black is still ahead here. Now it says that my opponent should capture my bishop, and then I should capture with my king. That would have been better. So my opponent instead played bishop to e5, targeting my rook. But the computer instead likes this capture. I capture with the king, and then queen to b1 to help guard over here. So now, in the game, after this bishop to e5 move, I ignored the attack on my rook and play e3. Or sorry, a3. Excuse me. I played a3, thinking, oh, well, maybe I can just push forward here. If he takes my rook, I can push forward and threaten to get a queen out of this. So the computer says instead I should have played rook to g8, then queen to b1, and then a3. But I guess that still works, because if he tries to stand in front of this pawn, I could capture with a check. So let's see what actually happened in the game. So after bishop to e5, attacking my rook, I played e3 here, ignoring the attack on my rook. And then we have a capture here, which is a mistake. So this is a mistake because it allows my bishop to capture with check here. And at this point, black is pretty much winning. The best move, it looks like, would have been b4. Even then, though, black is ahead. So after b4, it looks like capturing en passant would be best. And then queen captures. But then we have rook to c8. Rook to c8, which, I don't know if I would have found all these moves in the game. Now, capture the rook. I probably would have moved my rook instead of lining up on the king like this. But this would allow bishop to move, revealing a attack on c3. So I'm threatening to capture this pawn, forking the king and the queen here. So the best move is to cover that with the rook. But now we have bishop to a4, attacking the queen and the rook here. So, if the queen retreats, although now it's saying queen to b7 would have been better. So let's take a quick look at that. Queen to b7, threatening to attack or capture my other rook here. So now we have, oh man. rook captures. This would be tricky to find these moves. We capture there. And this is crazy. It's recommending queen to c8. You know, and then you just capture the black could just capture the queen, the rook could capture. Maybe you would think of this move, check, but the king could run up here, and now what? Queen to b7 check. Is there anything else? Queen to d8. Threatening that way. Looks like that's better. Anyway, black would be winning no matter what. So, you know, let's take a look at, well, if we go back here, queen to a2, you know, then you would capture, bishop captures, queen captures. So this is the other possibility of how it could play out. But you know, at this point, what do we have going on here? So as far as material, white would be ahead in material here, but we have an attack on the king. You know, what would we do next here? We could even develop this bishop up here to b4, threatening a mate here. So that's the third best move. King to f7 is even better. So if we go there, threatening to, you know, try and go after this bishop. Now we have what? Queen to b3 attacking. But then what do we have? Computer likes a2. So if we had a2, queen captures, I mean, why wouldn't you just, I guess there's too much pressure with that queen. So, you know, then you just capture here, and it's going to be hard to stop this pawn. King up to d2, attacking. And now bishop, ooh, to b4. A nasty discovered attack. Or you could just push forward or move the rook immediately over here. Anyway, you get the idea. So in the game, let's see what actually happened. My rook is under attack. I push the pawn, you know, threatening to just keep going and trying to queen. My opponent captures, but this allows my bishop to capture here. So now we have a check, and my opponent, you know, can only move here or block with the queen. So my opponent moved here and then resigned. You know, how could the game continue? I was thinking I probably need to castle here because my rook's under attack. And so I guess I was right about that, but you know, we didn't continue. So if I were to castle, well, then what do we have? Queen to a2 is a possibility. You know, now I have to be careful. I can't move my bishop because my queen will be picked off. But you know, there are different checking possibilities here. So it looks like, oh, and now I can just pick this off. Queen takes c3, and it looks like that's the best move. So capture, rook to b2. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that doesn't look so good. But, you know, what can you do? Because there's a threat coming. So, you know, this rook, this could be dangerous. So if they do that, well, then I'm probably just going to capture that with my bishop. Now it's saying rook to a7 would be a good move. I mean, but why wouldn't you just do that? Capture, queen captures, and then you're just ahead in material here. You know, the queen could just march over here and pick this off. But you get the idea, and at this point we would be ahead +4. So, you know, what is another possibility? Let's see if we go back a little bit here. Instead of, you know, so once I castle, instead of going over here, are there any other options? I mean, because if you move the queen, this pawn will be picked off. So, I don't know. It is looking pretty grim. If you played h3, queen to b2, then your queen just gets picked off by the bishop. So I don't know, the computer is looking at that move, but then you threaten to just swing over this way and check. So now queen to b2 is the best move. Bishop to d6. Threaten to capture that, and then rook to b7 check. Queen to b2 is the best move. Oh my gosh. I mean, I guess you could try something like that. But then, what? Capture? You know, if you capture this way, well then it's really looking bad because you can capture with the rook or the queen. If you capture with the queen, that gives them time to block. But now you can do what here? Oh man, then you could pick this off and the queen can't capture because it's pinned by the rook. Okay, well, you get the idea here. So if we go back to where the game ended, let's see, capture, capture with check, and my opponent moves. We see that these pawns, and it's really this c pawn, is helping squeeze the opponent's position here, and he's kind of cramped, and it's causing issues. You know, and then my pieces have a lot more room to maneuver. So that's what you want to try and do if you're trying to squeeze your opponent. Just slowly push your pawns forward and gain more space and cramp their position. But you have to be careful that you don't trade off too many pieces while you're doing that. Because the more pieces you trade off, especially if your pawns are pushed very far forward, then that's a lot of gaps in your position that you might have to watch out for. And if you don't have enough pieces to cover all these gaps, you know, as you create more space, your opponent could jump in behind your pawns and it'll be harder to cover everything. If there's a lot of space and not many pieces to, you know, cover that space. But on the other side, if you're in the cramped position, you want to definitely try and trade off material so that the pieces you have left have more room to maneuver around. So we see the king is really just stuck and cramped in here. You know, and this rook never even moved. You know, of course, this one hasn't either. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this chess strategy video where we demonstrated one way that you can squeeze your opponent and use that to your advantage. So please leave comments with any critiques, any requests, something you want to see in future videos. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching and have a super chess day.